Welcome learners to the course on Foundations of Heutagogy. The topic for today's presentation is Taxonomy of Educational Objectives. As a discipline, education starts with the Bloom's Taxonomy of Educational Objectives. When we come to teaching, learning, evaluation mechanism, the first thing that comes into our mind while discoursing is the taxonomy of educational objectives. Now this taxonomy literally means classification, and educational objectives are the objectives that are set to reach educational goals. Now Benjamin Bloom was the proponent to propose the taxonomy of educational objectives. So before going into the educational objectives in details, let us go through a little bit of preview. Bloom's taxonomy was originally developed by the educational psychologist Benjamin Bloom in 1956, and it was later revised by researchers and also his disciples Laurin Anderson and David Krathwohl in 2001. Well, now this taxonomy of educational objective is also regarded as a model of learning, and this model of learning focuses not on the content and instruction. Well, the content is the subject matter and the instruction is how are we delivering that content through methodology. But rather, it focuses on how students think and how best to promote cognition and understanding in students. So this model of learning or the taxonomy of educational objectives focuses on the ways and means of learners' thinking ability and how they can rethink, promote their cognition, promote their thinking abilities and also understanding. Well, this approach classifies in a hierarchical way the various objectives and skills that teachers hope to help students achieve. Whenever a content is delivered, or to be very precise, whenever we are teaching something as teachers or parents, the first thing that comes into our mind is how well my child or my learner will be able to grasp the content that I am teaching. Now this approach or the taxonomy of educational objectives actually gives us the path of how can we proceed with our teaching learning. And this proceeding towards the teaching learning is classified in a very systematic way, which is rather called hierarchical way. We know hierarchical is from low to high, from simple to complex. Now Bloom's taxonomy is nothing but it is a set of three hierarchical models used to classify educational learning objectives into levels of complexity and specificity. A few seconds back, I just narrated that hierarchical is from simple to complex. So the cognition or the thinking ability that starts from very simpler form and proceeds to a very complex form is all about the educational objectives that are being set. The models organize learning objectives into three different domains. We are very much acquainted with these three domains. The first one is of course the cognitive domain. Second, the affective domain. And the third is sensory or psychomotor. Psychomotor is the most colloquial term that is being used. The first volume of this taxonomy, Handbook 1, Cognitive, was published in 1956. So initially the cognitive domain educational objectives were set, which is regarded as the Handbook 1, and it was published in 1956. However, the second volume of taxonomy, which is called as the Handbook 2, which deals with affective domain, was published in much later, 1964. Well, now this entire model or the entire taxonomy of educational objectives, this hierarchy, this framework was revised in 2001. And now the educational objectives that we are using in rampant for our teaching learning purposes is the revised one. And this is called the revised Bloom's taxonomy. So our focus will be on the revised Bloom's taxonomy, and in the later part of our presentation definitely we'll throw light upon the revised part. Now, as I have already said, there are three domains of Bloom's taxonomy. The cognitive domain, here a little bit of clarification is made. The cognitive domain deals with the knowledge-based thinking. The affective domain is the emotion-based, that is the feeling. And the psychomotor or the sensory domain, it deals with the action-based, that is the willing to do. So it is often called as the thinking, feeling, willing model. The first one that was published in 1956, as it has been already said, it is in the original version of the taxonomy. The cognitive domain is further divided into 6 levels. Now, the 6 levels that we were talking about were revised in 2001. So, that is the revised edition of Bloom's taxonomy. The levels are slightly different from the original taxonomy. So, here is a little excerpt like remember, understand, apply, analyze, evaluate, create rather than synthesize. The name is changed from noun to verb form. As you can recollect that the initial or the older version of Bloom's taxonomy of educational objectives, the objectives were written in the noun form, whereas in the revised form, the same noun forms are changed into word form. Now here is a little bit of schematic representation of the revision. For better understanding, you can see 1956, the pyramid, it shows all the objectives in the noun form, whereas the revised one, the right hand side, the pyramid shows the same objectives, those were laid in the form of noun, are now being set in the form of verb. So, evaluation became evaluate, synthesis, create, analysis, analysis, application, apply, comprehension, understand, knowledge, remember. So, from noun form to verb form. And another revision is made, as it is evident from the slide. You see the synthesis got hierarchical position top of evaluation. So, synthesis is to create, that occupies the highest position in the cognitive ability, and evaluation comes next to the creation. Now, when we talk about objectives, educational objectives, as teachers, as educators, how can we translate them into our transaction, into our teaching learning process? So, for that we need some verb for critical thinking, right? Now, here you can see there are, as we have already said, there are 6 levels of educational objectives which were further divided from the cognitive domain. So, you can see the first one or the lowest one is the knowledge. Then comes understand, apply, analyze, evaluate and create. And below them you can see there are some verbs written. These are called the action verbs through which we actually delineate, define our teaching learning process for a particular content. So, I won't repeat these verbs as it is evident from the slide. There are a number of verbs that are used under each subdomain of the cognitive domain. Now, having said this, now clearly defining the cognitive domain, the revision that was made and the revised form that is in vogue and is being used profusely for teaching learning process, we will now come to the affective domain. Now, affective domain, as you can recollect, it is something related to emotion, the feeling. So, skills in the affective domain describe the way people react emotionally and their ability to feel other living things pain or joy. Affective objectives typically target the awareness and growth in attitudes, emotions and feelings. There are 5 levels in the affective domain, moving through the lowest order processes to the highest. So, similarly, just as we have seen in case of cognitive domain, there also we have seen the hierarchy that starts from simple to complex, from lowest to highest. Here also you can see that the affective domain objectives starts from the lowest to highest, that is receiving, responding, valuing, organization and characterization. Now, next to the affective domain, the last one is the willing to do, hands-on, that is the psychomotor domain. The objective is specific to physical function. Absolutely it deals with the physical function, reflex actions and body movements to interpret information and learn. It also implies the all the physical activity that supports or is a vehicle for cognitive growth and furthering knowledge or skills. So it is a supplement to the cognition. It is a supplement to the affective domain. And in this domain, the learner uses physical action to achieve a cognitive or affective objective. It is further divided into 5 levels. Just as we have seen in case of cognitive, in case of affective, this domain has also 5 levels, and these are also classified in the form of simple to complex. So these are imitation, manipulation, precision, articulation and naturalization. Now, why are we so much engrossed, so much necessary to read or to learn about educational objectives? So what is the importance of reading or imbibing Bloom's taxonomy of educational objectives? Well, after going through the different domains and the levels under each domain, we are into a position to accept that it actually helps and is a vital part of learning to achieve deeper, more advanced cognitive skills and abilities. Because systematically studying, systematically delivering teaching learning process is the most fruitful way of getting your learners, your child, your students to grasp the content. Now, it also helps in building upon each level in your lesson plans that will guide learners or a child to think in increasingly more sophisticated ways. There will be no abrupt, nothing that would come in a freaking way, but rather it will be in a very systematic way, starting from the lowest to the highest, starting from the simple and to the complex. So it increases gradually. Now this model of learning, or it is as we are more versed to deliver it as the educational objectives, taxonomy of educational objectives, it favors thinking and understanding over the currently trending focus on the development of cutting-edge curriculum and data-driven student assessment. So if we can follow the educational objectives while preparing our lessons, while giving a discourse to our learners or a child, this hierarchy of educational objective is a savior, because it actually helps to give a systematic lessons to the learners or any intended audience.